Hello and welcome. I'm Rabbi Ross, host of the Power Up podcast. And in this special anniversary edition, we hear from Rabbi Ross his story of his rejection and how it relates to Purim.
I'm about to share a story that seemed to be fairly uncomfortable for myself about a dating experience that I had, and I might well have to scrub this because I'm sure it's being recorded. But I'm sharing this is actually the night before our 18th anniversary, which is the 25th, which of course, those of you who are familiar, tomorrow is a fast day. What a great day to have an anniversary. This year we'll definitely be celebrating our Jewish anniversary, which is in about 10 days time. But the point is, again, because of the connection that tomorrow's anniversary, so I've got a bit of a story on the other end. So I want to first share with you half of the story, and then I'm going to ask you a question. So about 18 and a half years ago, I was actually learning in a yeshiva, and somebody who didn't actually really know me tried to make a connection between myself and the girl. I was 21 at the time, and he said, we'd like you to meet this girl. We think it's going to work out. I'm like, how do you possibly know that? Your daughter suggested it who's never actually, spoken to me. Okay, that's a different story. So he said, but there's a really strange one. He says the girl's father, the girl who is, 20 years old, the way they do it in their family, every family is different, is, some families, the girl meets you first. Some families, the girl's father will meet you first for a few minutes. She says the girl's brother-in-law is going to come down on a train from Glasgow. I was in Gateshead at that point. 18 and a half years ago, and he wants to spend a few minutes with you. I'm not quite sure why or how, but that was what that family wanted to do. The girl's brother-in-law, the girl's sister's brother, was going to meet me for a half an hour to chat with me, and when we were going to go out. Okay, if that's what they want to do. Everyone does it their own way. I didn't care. My parents didn't feel that way. The guy comes down from Glasgow to Gateshead on a train. We meet in this rabbi's house 18 and a half years ago. We have a really fantastic meeting. This charming guy, the girl, again, this is potential girl's brother-in-law, charming meeting. We even talk all sorts of things, wonderful meeting, tremendous connection. About a week or 10 days later, I get a message from the rabbi who set us up, and he says, this one isn't going anywhere. I said, what do you mean? He said, they're not even willing to meet you. I'm like, what? Firstly, it's me. But once we got past the fact that it's me, like, what do you mean they're not willing to meet? The meeting was great. I said, no, the brother-in-law really liked you. The girl's sister's husband, the brother-in-law who came down on the train from Glasgow to meet you, really likes you. That's not why they're not meeting you. I said, well, why they're not meeting me? Just now it's like my ego is getting bashed. Like, what's going on here? So they said, well, at the end of the day, they've made inquiries about you, and they found out you've got a dodgy stomach. Now, anyone that knows me knows I've got a stomach that's made out of, it's like a machine. Like, I don't have any stomach issues. And I'm like, okay, whatever it is, it is. And I'm like, I don't really get it. So the rabbi said, I don't get it either. He said, but then don't even want to meet you. And that is the end of that story. So that's a story that happens about 18 and a half years ago, very frustrating. Please hang on about 10 minutes. I'll tell you the end of the story. Before I finish off this story, which is very frustrating, I want to share something with you. This time of year, on Thursday night, tomorrow night or Friday, we read Megillas Esther. Megillas Esther is the story of the heroine Esther who saved the Jewish people. Now, we were about to, God forbid, be annihilated, but Esther came along and she stood up to the king and she went in there and she asked him to say, basically, in effect, there's a whole bunch of stories to save the Jewish people. Now, I'm going to share with you one particular phrase from it, which is definitely not seemingly the most important phrase. It says, all his mighty and powerful acts and the full account of the greatness to which the king advanced Mordecai. Mordecai was like one of the male heroes, are recorded in the journals of the king of Media and Persia. Without boring you with all the details, we seem to be staying here. We seem to be referring to Megillas Esther, the book of Esther, in terms of the history. Now, I know that Jeremy Rosenberg and some others on this call are tremendously into history. Usually we don't care less about history. I'm speaking about myself, but the Torah is not a history book. It very rarely is there to record history. So the question is, why exactly, when we're discussing the Megillah, we're going through this incredible story where it's spread over a number of years, and, you know, at the end of the day, looked like we're going to be destroyed. This wicked man Haman wanted to kill us. King Ahasuerus was in with him, with it. But then Esther saves us. And then at some point, we're taught this history idea. The question is exactly why that is even brought there. And just one other question is, if you ever look, maybe, I don't know how many of you have the opportunity to be in shul this year, but before it started, they get the scroll and they like unravel the whole thing. And it's like put up like that. Like if you look at a Sefer Torah in shul on Shabbos, that never happens. Like you just sort of open it and then you roll it. Here, the whole thing is put upwards. So what we really want to look at are, firstly, what happened with the end of my shidduch story. What happened at the end that I was so frustrated and disappointed that the brother-in-law, after meeting me of this girl, apparently had a dodgy stomach. What happened? And I was pushed aside. Why is this line there about the history in the Megillah? Who cares? It's not a history book. And also, why do we unravel the whole Megillah?
And a fourth question I have is, why didn't you tell me that you had a dodgy stomach? But that's for later.
Indeed.
All right. So I wanted to. So I think let's start with the first question. The second question actually first, of why does it say that in the Megillah? And before I say anything, I want to ask you the question. The Megillah, there's a mitzvah on Purim to read Megillah twice, right? Now, if I were to ask you, why is it important to have that book, or why is it important to hear the story, to hear the Megillah? What would you tell me? Anyone wants to venture a guess? No right or wrong answers. Actually, I'm going to venture and say that every single one of your answers are going to be wrong. So on that positive note, does anyone want to guess what might be the reason? What I'm curious to hear is what you think the reason that we hear the Megillah, or we have this book. Seeing that I have full faith that you will probably all get it wrong, go ahead. No one embarrassed. Yes, Michelle.
Gilla, I mean, I'd have thought that the purpose would be so that we can hear the story and remember what happened.
So Michelle, when you started your answer, I started to sweat because I thought to myself, oh no, the first person's going to get it right.
No.
My skin is saved and you've got it wrong. And the reason, this is going to come out sounding wrong, but the reason why I'm so confident that everyone's going to get it right is because that's the reason that I would have said as well. Not that I'm saying that I'm always right, but of course I am always right.
You're always right.
18 years, but it worked. And any other guesses? Now, I mean, it's the obvious one, right? We'd say, yes, someone was going to answer.
No, it's a silly one, but I believe you're meant to get not annihilate is the wrong word actually, but you're meant to get so drunk that you can't tell the difference between good and evil and Haman and Ahasuerus. But so therefore you probably read it the first time and you get so drunk you can't remember. You have to do it again.
Ooh.
Wrong, obviously.
It is a nice try.
But it's not right.
I mean, there's many times where I've had to read things twice just purely because I wasn't concentrating the first time.
But my question is even deeper, is why do we even read it the first time? Okay, I'm going to give one more person a chance to get just to save my sort of like, because I put myself out there that everyone was going to get it wrong. So let's see if anyone can prove me wrong. Anyone wants to guess?
Yeah.
Yes, go Anna.
There are loads of reasons I can think of, but is one, if you don't realize something, how precious something is or how important it is until you nearly lose it. So if we know stories and keep reminding ourselves about how Judaism was nearly lost and nearly nearly collapsed or nearly disintegrated, then we're more likely to appreciate the fact that it's still here and we still have a community and a people and a faith and a way of life.
So that is a really beautiful answer, and I'm not going to say you're wrong because I'm sure there's many reasons of why we read it, but let me explain to you this idea that I saw that I think is really going to change the way we look at the Purim story, and not that, but the way we look at our everyday lives as well. And Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky says that seemingly insignificant phrase in the Megillah, in the story of Esther, which tells us that if you want to know what happened to Mordechai, the male hero of the story, after Ahasuerus gave him power, go and look in the history books, the secular history books. He says it is perhaps the most important phrase of the Megillah. Why? Because we think it's Purim, we're celebrating, we're going to hit the Megillah to hear the story. He says, no. There were many, many stories that happened in our history. Very, very few of them were written down, right? If the Megillah, if the story of Esther was not written down as a history book, because the book itself directs us to other sources to go find the history, why on earth was it written down? So listen to this answer, and I think it's gonna really, really open something up, because it really did for me as well. So when we think about the world, when we think about world history, right? And this is something important to know about the story of Megillas Esther, the Purim story. We read a story. If you ever flip through the story, you read through it, and it's a series of events. What's one thing that's really important to bear in mind is that it happened over 9 years. So 9 years is quite a long time. Think back of all the things that have happened to you over the past 9 years. Lots of things happen over the past 9 years, right? Now, what happens is that when you read that story and you bear in mind that it happened over 9 years, you see lots of different things happened. And there's no prophecies in the book of Megillas Esther. God's name is not mentioned. There's no open miracles. All it is a series of events that happened. And it tells us something profound, that the world, there is a purpose in the world, and world history has a purpose. And God is orchestrating events so that the world moves along to its purpose. Now, let me show you how this happens. We start off the story of Megillas Esther with some wild tale about a king who throws a party and gets drunk and decides to kill his wife. Okay, it's a crazy story. If you stop and you think about it, you're like, whoa, what was that all about? Now, what we now know, what happens next is then he runs this beauty pageant, and it just happens to be that this poor Jewish girl gets anointed the new queen. Now, bear in mind, at this point, there was no decree against the Jews. The Jews were fine. The Jews were safe. Haman was not even thinking about destroying the Jews. What does this tell us is that, and this is a profound concept that we see in Jewish history, and I'm going to show you as well in our lives as well, is that God prepares the cure before the illness. Before the decree came out that the Jews were about to be destroyed, before God brought out this decree, Haman brought out this decree together with Ahasuerus that all the Jews were going to be destroyed, God had already put the plan in place to save them. How amazing is that? That God put the cure into place before the illness, before the decree. And if we think about this in world history as well, but the same is actually true about our lives. Just like the world has a destiny and the world has a purpose, we too in our lives have a purpose, and God orchestrates things in our life so that we can become, that he can move our souls closer to perfection. Think about it for a minute. Think about the person that you didn't marry, or the person that you did marry. Think about the job that you did get, or the job that you didn't get. We think about the big things, but think about the small things as well. Think about like the person you just happened to meet who happened to tell you something. Or think about like, you know, the person that you the traffic light that you missed. All these small things, we have a name for it. It's called Hashgacha Pratit, that Hashem, God intervenes in our life, that there's divine inspiration. The initials for it are HP, which stands for Hashgacha Pratit, but also tells us, hey, there's a higher power that's directing our lives. And this leads us into why it's so important that we unravel the whole Megillah before we start reading. Because again, sometimes we ask those questions, and I had someone a week ago or so who asked me those questions. She says, I don't get it. You know, God put X,
X, Y, Z in my life. And then God always took those things away, and I can't understand it. And what we have to understand is that when we have those questions, we're in the middle of the story. Imagine if you stopped reading the Megillah in the middle of the story, it'd be a disaster. Imagine if you opened up the Megillah and started reading it in the middle, you wouldn't understand it either. The only way we can understand it is when we unravel it all and we read it in sequence, right? That we see that even though these seems like a series of unconnected events that took place over 9 years, all the events of the Purim are connected, and even the negative events led to God's salvation. And the same thing in our life, that all of the events of our life are connected, and they're all there because God is directing them in order for us to meet our purpose and for which is our soul's perfection.
Thank you so much. Just before I carry on, hi Ben. It's been a while. Yeah, you, Ben Salon. Nice to see you. Hi.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
I just want to finish with my story from before. Now that you've heard this amazing idea that Gil has brought down, that you get the Megillah is not just a little bit. You've got this whole story over 9 years you've got to look at. And when you look at the whole story together, all of a sudden you see something very, very that there's God behind the scenes who is orchestrating it and doing it in order to save us, to help us. And we don't see it when we just look at one little picture and it seems so horrible and so hard. So again, my story was 18 and a half years ago, I was introduced to this young lady who I never got a chance to meet. Her brother-in-law comes all the way down from Glasgow to meet me and likes me, or so I thought. But then the girl won't meet me because her father was told that I had a dodgy stomach. I today, 18 years later, am married to that guy's sister instead of a sister-in-law. It didn't work out. The father didn't want me, so he introduced me to his sister, who is Gila, who 18 years later, I'm now married to for 18 years.
Thank God for that. That's mazel tov. That's beautiful.
A definite l'chaim.
God helped his soul meet its perfection.
My goodness, like where would I be otherwise? Like while we're on the story of stories and l'chaims, so my Hadassah actually asked me a question earlier, and she said to me she asked me this question about an hour ago. She said to me, when I moved to Calgary, Canada, 13 and a half years ago, she asked me, when was the first time I met with students, teenagers? I was a teenage rabbi there in Canada. So I said, I remember the story. I said that the rabbi of the shul says to me, go and call the following 6 teenagers up. They are because the whole Orthodox shul only had about 15 teenagers who are connected. Most of them just came to shul probably once or twice a year. I mean, it makes our shuls, whichever shul we go to, looking pretty good actually. But the point is that it was a wasteland. There was almost, the intermarriage rate was about 90%. Like there was no chance of any connection afterwards. And he says to me, take these 6 names. He says, I think these are the most likely 6 to help you build something. You don't understand. When I moved to Calgary, Canada, together with Gila and David and Hadassah 13 and a half years ago, I made some cold calls to get some kids involved. One teenager that I called, his name is Jordan, okay? I called him up and said, this is Rabbi Ross here, I'm starting off, I like to do some stuff. And he says, go home. We don't need you. We have all of this stuff here already. Go away. 4 years later, when we became the biggest youth group in town, I reminded him of the phone call. But the point is, that was what I was up against. Total secular apathy, you name it. So I met with these 6 teenagers. I remember I called them all up, and I think 5 of them showed up in a coffee shop. We met. I remember to this day where it was in Glenmore Landing, a Starbucks there. We had a great conversation. We started a youth group. And it was really, really phenomenal. One of the girls who came, her name was Shoshana. Why am I mentioning this story? There's a lot that happened in between. And no one knows why Hashem set up this organization called the Kolo in Calgary with the youth work that we did. But I can tell you that yesterday, February the 23rd, 2021, 13 and a half years after we first met her, when she was 13, she's probably now 26, we called into New York to a Zoom bris of her son. She was there. I'd actually never seen a picture of her in her wig, in her shaitel since she got married. And there she was 13, 14 years later, not just continuing on the Jewish line, but dramatically carrying it on in a religious hub of New York, actually the Moa was the famous Rabbi Pesach Krohn, because that's like the sort of world that she is in. And it just sort of made me realize, I don't know why Hashem didn't start a kollel there or sent us there 13 or 14 years ago. But at the end of the day, certainly a part of the plan where the remedy was already there before, the remedy was set up before this girl was going to get to the age where it would have been too late. There had to be some generations that were going to come out. So that was another story. Many other stories, but a similar story that I wanted to share just because we were actually at this bris in New York yesterday. Gil, I think you have one final story.
I did.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I did. So apologies if I think I may have mentioned it to someone. So apologies if I did, but hopefully your memory is as bad as mine and you'll have forgotten it already, even though I told it to you, I think, 2 days ago.
You're the best at everything, including your memory. Anyway.
Yes, that's why I always forget my phone everywhere, right? I'll remind you of that next time. So many of you know that we used to live in Vancouver. And the year before we left Vancouver, we kind of had like the signs that maybe it was time for our family to move on, because even though both of us had fantastic jobs, we loved our jobs, we were impacting the community, we were so settled, we loved it all there. For our kids, it was a different story, especially like the older ones. Like there wasn't much of a religious community there. There wasn't enough of the peer pressure that the peer support group that they needed in order to grow up loving being Jewish, and we just felt they weren't thriving. But it was a very, very, very difficult decision to make. And we kept thinking, maybe it's the personality of the child, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Eventually, we decided to ask someone who told us, wow, that's a big question. Go ask someone bigger than me. So we went to really an incredible person. It's that part of the story is a story for another time. Happy to share it with you. And he basically told us time to go. And at the time, we didn't have a job to go to. So it meant both of us.
Right, because this was already in July. He told us this in July.
July 4th, I think.
We should have left earlier, but we were fooling ourselves because we didn't want to leave because we love Canada so much. Just came to citizens and we love Vancouver. We just didn't want to leave.
And so he told us it's time for you guys to go. And we had, thank God, 6 children. I was pregnant with the 7th, just found out that I was pregnant. And he basically told us, get up and go, right? And move back. So we decided to move back to the UK because we felt we had a little bit of a financial cushion which would last us, but it was terrifying to sort of leave with a family like that. And it was also for me on a personal level, I felt like it was very hard because we'd looked into jobs in England. We absolutely are both passionate about Jewish education and we wanted to continue with that, but it looked like every single avenue in England had been closed to us for that. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't get it. Like I was talking to God about this and I was saying, Hashem, I don't get it, right? Like I spent the past 10 years giving and educating and, I feel like at least on some level, it's because I want to do the right thing for God. And now it's kind of like, you're closing the door in my face, like why? And we moved back here. And luckily, thank God, within about 2 weeks or so, we connected up with Seed. They happened to have to have a job opening that just opened up. And within 2 months, we were working for Seed. And it's been an amazing 3 years. But the story is amazing because I only found out about this about a couple of weeks ago. Is because when we left Canada, we left, but because we didn't have a job, we didn't know that we were for sure leaving. We left and let's go see what happens when we move to England. And a couple of weeks ago, for whatever reason, we found out that in Canada, to be eligible for a pension, you have to live there for 10 years. So we looked at our dates and we moved in the end of August and we left the middle of August 10 years later, which meant that we were short by about 10 days, right? Which is a huge thing to not qualify it. So
and in Canada, we're talking about serious money.
And
we're not talking about small money.
And we were like, oh my goodness, like, why didn't anyone tell us? Like 10 extra days, we would have managed it. And we looked into it a little bit further. And here's the crazy thing that we found, that I got what I wanted, which was, God, give me the job before I leave, we would not have been eligible for it, right? We would have lost all the money because we would have had to move to England in order for our kids to start school on the 1st of September, like all their peers.
But because we left open, right, without something to leave into, legally, we were still considered residents in Canada until we kind of like made our roots in England, which means that about 3.5 years later, we found out how amazing it was that we didn't have that job to jump right into when we got there, because it now means that, please God, you know, when the time comes, we will be eligible for that pension in Canada, which is just incredible to really think about it, that this was all happening. We didn't know about it until 3 years after the fact.
And it's just, again, we could keep going. There's just 2 or 3 different stories, but I think the idea that Gil has really brought out, learned from the Megillah, is that, you know, so often we look at little details and little situations, and it seems so bleak and so horrible and frustrating. And it's like, how could someone turn me down in so many different ways? And it seems impossible. And I want to have a temper tantrum and everything else. But you think about the Megillah, you think about the lesson, you think about that the most important thing is to look at the bigger picture. And Hashem has a bigger picture and he's looking out for us. And the question there is, what do we do with it? Is when we look at the bigger picture of things, will we want to continue to stay connected? Will we want to push our Jewish, not just to survive, but to thrive onto a whole new level for us and for our families? That is our question as we come up to Purim and in general. It's been tremendous meeting and learning with so many of you. Again, we've got Monday night for men. Please be in touch with me if you're interested. Wednesday night for women.
And don't tell the guys, but we have treat bags.
Yeah, we don't need treat bags. We're in it for the right reasons. And anyway, lots and lots of smiles. So great to see all of you. We're officially done, but we look forward to staying in touch with you. Have a great evening. Thank you so much all of you for giving up the evening. And L'chaim.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. We hope this inspires your Purim and beyond. And if you got something out of this podcast, please share the word and subscribe so you get future episodes.